Good morning. We're here this morning with the Honorable Nelson Diaz, formerly a judge of the Court of Common Pleas of the First Judicial District, and as a matter of fact, former administrative judge of the Trial Division, right?
That's correct. Thank you.
Well, it's good to see you today.
It's my pleasure to be here.
I appreciate it. I appreciate your coming. Can we start with your background, where you were born, where you're from?
Yeah, I was born in a place called Bellevue Hospital in New York.
Mm-hmm.
That's why people think I'm a little crazy.
I've heard of Bellevue, yeah.
Since it is also a mental institution, but it's a great hospital in terms of maternal care for older and poor families.
Uh-huh.
And I then went to St. John's, graduated from St. John's in the College of Business Administration, and I was an accounting major.
Okay.
And never applied to law school. I was recruited to law school by a professor and the chairman of my accounting department, who was a lawyer.
Yeah.
And he made a recommendation. I hadn't applied. And that's how Peter Leocoris got a hold of me.
Uh-huh.
And I came to Philadelphia to study law and stayed here.
That's great. Oh, what did you do? You were a full-time student, I guess, before you became a judge?
Yes, I was a full-time student, and then I was involved I became an economic developer in North Philadelphia. I developed about 160-some businesses in what we call a Bloque de Oro, which is sort of a golden block in North Philadelphia under a federal contract. I was a public defender, then I went to Wolf Block. From Wolf Block is when I was elected judge. I developed a great mentor out of Wolf Block, Howard Giddis.
Yeah.
And Howard Giddis was my mentor throughout my career until he passed away.
Now, I was going to ask you, is there someone in your background whom you admired, and so that would be Howard Giddis?
In terms of my legal profession,
Yes.
I owe a lot to Peter Leocoris and Howard Giddis. Peter because
Temple.
Yeah, Temple, because he sort of talked me into the law. I really wanted to be an accountant. The law was never a primary desire of mine.
Right.
And Howard, because Howard walked me through the steps not only of the judiciary, but throughout my career, whether it was at HUD as general counsel, whether it was city solicitor, or whether it was when I was a partner at Blank Rome.
Yeah, and you have had a varied career coming up, I know that.
Yeah, I sort of wish sometimes that I had stayed on the bench because I love the courts.
Yeah.
But after I did the administrative judge deal, I was the first minority ever to be an administrative judge in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, appointed by the Supreme Court. And it was a tough period because I reduced the budget by $10 million a year, which was over $100 million, and then it lasted 20 years, so it was $200 million, which was used to build the Justice Center, which is now called the Stout Justice Center.
Oh, right, okay.
I had to relieve 500 employees from the court system, and it was a contentious period. The city was in bankruptcy, pretty much. The state had taken over under a PICA board, and we were extremely cooperative with the court system to essentially reduce our budget, since the Supreme Court never enforced the position that the state should be taking over, taking over the court system. And then I did a number of modifications which improved the court system. We took over the procurement system, and that allowed us to have that allowed us to have real phones instead of phones that we couldn't utilize. We had still rolling phones. We brought the computers in. We created a judge pro temp program, which was real lawyers trying cases in the court, not the one that we have today, which is sort of a mediation program. But you had 60 lawyers of very, very qualified and high-level integrity trying cases, and we got rid of the backlog within the 18 months. It was a 7-year backlog.
There was a huge backlog in civil cases, I remember that.
It was unbelievable, 7 years.
Thousands and thousands of cases.
And you know, the theory is if you have a willing judge and you force the parties to trial, 90% of the cases are going to settle. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's an easy phenomenon, but if you don't push anything, people will
Right.
delay. And so that was really the phenomena of getting rid of all those cases, including cases that were tax cases that were sort of pending in the city for years and
Okay.
years. And we got rid of those in about 6 months.
I know that the lawyers were given dates certain, and they were dates certain.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Everybody had to be there, whether they liked it or not,
Yeah.
or they were prepared or not. And in the old days, you asked them if they were prepared, and then they continued them if they weren't prepared, and so it was a very lax system.
Yeah.
But it created some controversy because I tried the entire civil side with lawyers, volunteer lawyers.
Yeah.
And all the judges were sent over to the criminal side of the court, of the trial division. And so that helped reduce the backlog on the criminal side. Because
too.
you have to have the constitutional
Right.
judges on the criminal side.
Yes.
You can waive judges on the civil side.
Yeah.
And so that was really a phenomena that I'm very thankful for the lawyer Gordon and Devine,
Yeah.
both plaintiff and defense counsel, who put these groups together. And the Philadelphia Bar Association was extremely helpful, even though, behind the scenes, because they didn't want to be perceived to be irritating the judges.
Yeah, right. No, don't do that. Yeah. Well, I remember the time I came here from family court in around 1990 or 91, and that was around the time that these changes were happening.
Yeah, the real problem was that it didn't happen in any other of the courts. So when I became city solicitor,
Yeah.
under the street administration, I worked together with Judge Doherty in creating a program also for the family court, in which we essentially force cases to have certain dates
Yeah.
with absolutely subpoena power and making sure that those cases were tried on time. And Judge Doherty did a great job with regard to working with him in terms of that. So I experienced the only place I guess we didn't do much of anything was probably the offense court, because it's sort of a specialized court.
Right.
But the entire court system has had an injection of Diaz ability to manage systems.
Yes.
And controversially too.
Yes, I know, but it was landmark, and it was a landmark reduction in the backlog in the civil side, and now I know from the criminal side too.
Yeah, but we know Judge Davis, I had
Right.
him trying the entire pushing of the criminal side
Yeah.
programs. The homicide program, since we had more judges, we could put more. And then what we did also is, if you spend some logic, you take judges who people are willing to waive in front of, particularly on the homicide program.
Yeah.
And so I would put people like Judge Jackson, for example,
Okay.
in the criminal homicide program, because if you can waive a case, you can try it in a day instead of 2 weeks.
right,
With
yeah.
regard to having a jury and going through that process.
Exactly.
So we reduced it all along the line, but it was somewhat controversial. And then when after 18, 19 months, I was relieved of my duties. They put in Judge Bonavita Cola,
Right.
and Judge Bonavita Cola continued the process, and there was peace in the valley. So it was
Okay.
really something that I take great pride in. And from that is when I was asked to go to Washington, D.C., to do a similar kind of situation in the Public Housing Authority.
Oh, I know that you worked there, but I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, so I thought I wanted to go to the federal court now that we had a Democrat. The
Yeah.
line was long, and they appointed Judge Rendell at that time, and they appointed to the U.S. Attorney's Office Michael Stiles.
Right.
Michael Stiles, Judge Messiah Jackson, and Judge Nigro were my personnel committee that helped with the functioning of reducing the staff.
Wow.
And then Tyler Grom Davis, who was pushing the criminal side. I worked with Gaffney, Judge Gaffney on the
Right.
civil side. I had Judge Klein produce a new process in the jury system.
Yep.
He did that in 6 weeks. The video was still playing till recently.
Yeah.
And so we avoided as much as we could to have judges in the courtroom as we were selecting in civil cases, selecting juries. So all of that modernization really allowed the judges to just work when they had to. And then I forced a process in which Judge John Harrell,
Okay.
brought into system, which was comparing activities among judges. He put this
Oh.
here, he gave me that system. He never took credit for it publicly, but he gave me that system. That system got leaked out to the public, and so all the judges were very cognizant of the fact that they had to produce.
Yes.
And that never happened here before.
And that everybody knew that they had to produce.
Well, I think the element at the end was, not only was this the best court system in the country,
Yeah.
we have more cases here than even the Eastern District has, and probably a lot of the federal courts put together. We had all of the cases that were in the class action related, like the
Right.
asbestos cases.
Okay.
And I put Judge Moss to run that program.
And she did very well.
She became a national figure
Yeah.
on class actions. And then I put all the retired judges in the class action program.
Okay.
So that they all could be involved in that program. So it was a change in the traditional pace of the court system. The court's never been the same
Yes.
after that. Everybody's cognizant of production, even today. Even though justice is required, but justice
Sure.
slow is justice denied to some extent.
Yeah.
So when they saw me doing that, they wanted me to become general counsel at HUD. I turned the job 3 times and finally accepted it because I really wanted to go to the federal court.
Yeah.
And I took on a backlog of about 23 major litigation cases around the country and resolved them. It cost about $9 billion in settlements that I put together. They were all fair housing cases and public housing cases, and resolved them during that 4-year period that I was there,
Well, haven't
and
you-
left the court without that. So I was good at getting rid of cases, but not always making friends in the process.
Right. Yeah. Well, didn't you always have an interest in public housing? And
You're absolutely right. And fair housing.
Yeah.
When I was a White House fellow, I worked for Vice President Mondale.
Okay.
Vice President Mondale was the author of the Fair Housing Act.
Okay.
He had a lot of influence in my career. And then when I was working as a law student in Camden Regional Legal Services,
Yeah.
I worked on the Mount Laurel cases, which is also a fair housing case
Okay.
in Mount Laurel. And I also worked on the issue of poor housing and the violations of leases and so forth. So I had somewhat of an education
Right.
in that area.
Yeah. Well, you know how it really was.
That's right. And then I grew up in public housing.
Yeah,
So
okay.
so I had a personal experience of what works and what doesn't work. And so when I went to HUD, I was able to clear that backlog also and change the law on public housing. I created what we call, and you would call it in the business world as leveraging.
Yes. Okay.
They called it as public-private venture relationships.
Okay.
So I got public housing to, instead of just warehousing people,
Yeah.
to be involved in making sure that they have ventures with private sector companies. That way, the private sector could leverage the money
Oh.
from the government and build market rate housing right next to public housing.
Excellent.
And you get more and more housing out of it.
Sure.
You and I understand that as leveraging. For some reason, the government couldn't understand that.
Well, that's
In the real world, that's what we do.
Actually, it doesn't surprise me. Yeah, okay. Now, would you consider these things that you've already spoken about, the reduction of the backlog, civil, criminal, the changing the housing laws and everything, do you consider those to be your chief legacy and
Well, I think my
accomplishments?
number one legacy was being the first Puerto Rican or Latino to pass the
Yeah.
Pennsylvania bar.
Okay,
The first Latino to be elected to the Court of Common Pleas in the state of Pennsylvania.
yeah,
The first Latino to be appointed in the state of Pennsylvania by Governor Thornburg.
yeah, okay.
The first Latino administrator in the court system. And I think also I had some leading cases. One was the Fairmount Park case where a foundation attempted to do some work at Fairmount Park that had been denied over 22 years.
Yeah.
The union sued because
Yeah.
they felt only the city workers could do that work. And as a result of my opinion, that allowed nonprofit organizations under city government organizations to
Yeah.
create their own foundation and to do work that is charitable in areas where there's neglect. And that's been a benefit to the Fairmount Park.
Right.
It's been a benefit to the Museum of Philadelphia of Art. It's been a benefit to the Free Library.
Yeah.
All of them have created these foundations to assist where there is no resources from the city.
Okay.
And otherwise, the Fairmount Park would be in devastating situation.
The
And as
work
you-
wouldn't have gotten done.
Yeah, never. It was never done for 22 years. I mean, the park was really falling apart.
Yeah.
And all the beautiful trees that we see today and all that benefit was a product of that group of volunteers with money from the William Penn Foundation.
Yeah, and
So-
the park is a beautiful gem that we have in this city, and quite a lot of people don't even know about it, but I think it's one of the most wonderful places.
Well, it backfired on the union.
Yeah, well,
Thinking,
right.
yeah, thinking that,
Yeah.
you know, that, because you couldn't afford to do it under those circumstances, but you could afford to have volunteers do it, and the money from the, so for example, you and I could plant trees with the trees purchased and bought by the
Foundation.
foundations and so
Yeah.
forth. So it was a really a changing event in this city.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of that. I'm also proud of a case that I wish I had ruled differently, which was the University of Pennsylvania mayoral scholarship case.
I don't remember.
That was there was a law that when Rizzo had given property to the University of Pennsylvania, that they were required then in exchange to provide merit scholarships for graduates of public schools in Philadelphia
Okay.
that attended the University of Pennsylvania. They had the wrong parties, and so I had to dismiss it on standing. But it was finally settled, and so what they did was provide a substantial number of scholarships, and that was during Rendell's mayoral
Okay.
process, a number of scholarships to public school students that go to the University of Pennsylvania. But I would have loved to have given everybody that
What they wanted.
and that was one that sort of a broken heart, but you have to follow the law.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest part. I think people understanding when you rule that sometimes the law supersedes your own philosophy, your
Yeah.
own desires.
Yes.
There was a case on the criminal side. There was a student in the courtroom who essentially faulted me all my life for a jury not believing the expert on a bite on a rape case. And the bite was supposed to be the identification mark, but that was sort of the beginning of using experts in that way.
Okay.
And they found the person not guilty, the landlord, who had gone in and allegedly raped this child. And so when I spoke at her graduation at Temple,
Yeah.
and she comes up to me, she says, "I am so sorry that I had this burden about you, and it's not about you, and I understand. It's a jury process,
Yeah.
and sometimes you can't overrule a jury,
Right.
and in particular the criminal." So it was wonderful for her to sort of give me
Of course.
that affirmation
Right.
when they didn't understand what that juries have a considerable amount of influence and power in the process.
Well, a lot of people generally don't understand quite a lot about what goes on in the court system, but especially the fact that judges, too, like everybody else, have to follow the
That's
law.
correct. And if you don't follow the law, you got an appellate process.
Yeah.
So it can always be corrected.
Yeah.
I remember a case that I needed correction because I didn't know which way to go. And I had two cases that were medical malpractice cases, and there was a federal law that required that information on the medical violations in the past be foretold to a jury. And so I didn't know whether the state required it or didn't require it. So I ruled it one way in one case, and I ruled the other way in the other case, just to be able to
Covered.
be able to get the decision from above. And I got the decision from above, which is no, you're not supposed to give that information.
Right.
So sometimes when you don't have, you have an appellate process
Yeah.
that sort of clears that up.
A safety net, if you will. Well, let me ask you, I wonder how, has the practice of law changed, do you think, a lot since when you first started?
Yeah, considerably. I was, even at Wolf Block, who was probably the best teachers I ever had.
Where you started,
Yeah, and when I got out of school, I did contract work, I did real estate work, I did trial work. So it was a somewhat, even the government relations, it was somewhat broader when I started practicing law. After I came back from Washington, which is then, I got on the bench in July of '81, and I came back to the courts to practice in '98.
Yeah.
And when I started practicing in '98, there was a greater emphasis on specialization. It wasn't totally gone yet, but there was a greater emphasis on specialization.
I see.
So having been a HUD background person
Yeah.
and being a litigator,
Okay.
I tried to do as much as I could in all areas in litigation. So I had a business client, I had the housing authority client, and I had other clients in the corporate world. And I was very successful. Then John Street calls me, and I said, I
Right.
don't want to go back to the public sector, but I did. I helped John Street get into law school, so I sort of felt a responsibility
Yeah.
as a friend. So,
Oh, good.
so I accepted the position, and as I'm working with John, the opportunity to do all again was great, because I did the gas company
Oh,
as
yeah,
counsel.
okay.
I did the airports, and I had relationships because of my Washington relationships
Yeah.
to get activities for the airport. I took a case and argued it before the Commonwealth Court.
Okay.
I took a case and took it to the Supreme Court on the Convention Center.
Yeah.
So it was
Did you
really
ever
abroad.
sleep during these years?
Oh, it was wonderful. I didn't sleep during the HUD years.
Okay.
I went to 179 cities during
Yeah.
the weekend and worked. You're right.
Wow.
I didn't sleep much during the HUD years. But as city solicitor, John Street didn't bother you on weekends. So it was great.
Wow.
He was great. Didn't bother you at all on weekends. And that was his policy. Never
Yeah.
bother anybody on weekends. And so each one of those things, I took charge. And so I wanted to be a part of it. So it was fun
Yeah.
to have a broader spectrum.
Sure.
And then when I get back to practice, specialization is so important today.
Today.
And it's harder to be able to be in all areas. Even as a litigator, you even have people who are pinholed into construction,
Yes.
into
Oh.
personal injury,
Yeah.
into commercial or contract action, into banking.
Yes.
So there's that, even in litigation, if you have specializations
Yeah.
within that. And I think it's a major change in the practice of law. And I like it all.
Okay.
And that's a big hassle for me, because to keep up with all is harder
I was gonna say.
than it was in the old days.
Yes, okay.
I mean, I even did
Geez, I wonder why.
I even did a divorce case in the old days.
Yeah.
I represented Dee Sharp against Kenny Gamble.
Okay, I remember
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
and
sure.
so I even did that. So litigation,
Yeah.
you could get involved in a broader sector.
I think I had a D.D. Sharp record.
Yeah, that's right, mashed potato. Right?
Yes, that's what it was. Well, Judge, we're getting a little short on
Yeah.
time. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us? I know we could go on for
Yeah.
hours.
Well, I think one of the things that we were able to do during that period of time was also change the salary structure. When I got here, it was $35,000. The judge, and it was key to the legislature.
Uh-huh.
So as I
Oh,
was
right.
here, as I was here, they finally changed the salary structure. So now you have younger judges coming on the bench, judges who are not going to retire but are going to work and be productive,
Right.
and you have more diversity on the court. When I was on the court, I was one of the few. In fact, I put Judge Freddie Masai as the first black woman, to try civil cases. So there wasn't that much diversity
Right.
on this court. you have over
Hardly.
30 judges of diversity now
Okay.
in this court, and we have probably 5 when I was here, out of 90. So the change is really one that, to me, I'm very proud of. 2, I wouldn't leave the
We
court.
should be.
Yeah, I wouldn't leave the court until another Latina was here.
Yeah.
And when Judge, who's now in the federal court, started, I sort of felt free to leave, and then my law clerk became a judge too, which is Teresa Sarmino.
Oh, yeah.
I received a lot of comfort in terms of not walking out without keeping the model.
Well-
I turned down a lot of jobs, but judging to me was the most important thing in my life, and I wanted to see justice be done as quickly as possible. I used to do opinions off the bench, for example, right off the bench.
Yeah.
So, people think that your writing skills are going to give you a great epitaph, but it's not.
Yeah.
So it was important for me to sort of encourage that, and I think these judges now are cognizant of
have
that.
to agree.
Yeah, and I miss it. I wanted to be on the federal side. Now I'm too old to be on any court, let alone the federal side. And it is the office that I used to hold meetings in right here. It is the court system that I sort of brought to the 21st century.
Yeah.
And I'm very proud of all of my colleagues who have been very supportive of me throughout the rest of my career and continue to treat me as one of their colleagues.
Well-
both here and on the federal side, by the way.
I
Even the federal, I
appreciate
meet
it.
with them, so.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so
too.
much.
And I thank you very much
Thank
for all the wonderful changes you brought around, efficiency. And I hope to see you soon.
Well, I'm glad you're doing this, because probably nobody would remember otherwise.
I don't know about that.